A lot of comments are thrown in the West, meant to be these conversation killers about the Middle East that, it feels so fake or artificial. There's no nature there, or there are too many malls. And I always find such comments so silly.
As much as we might see Dubai as an authored city, as a place that has been designed, within that, there are so many ways we begin to shape the city ourselves.
What makes up the character of a city? Is it just the big landmarks like Burj Khalifa, the Burj Al Arab?
The expression of glass, pushing it forward, reminds us of the Burj Al Arab, which Carlos Ott, the architect of this one, claims.
Tagline for your book is how architecture made Dubai. Play a little detective game with you. The design of these little buildings, how does that tell us the story of Dubai?
The biggest distinction between these two buildings is actually one that you don't physically see. The first building to have a double facade. Paris sets this up to be, this is an area of negotiation. Today we have this idea of the 15-minute city. There's a kind of ghost of the building still there. You're an unhappy person if you don't like this building.
In fact, this could be like a litmus test for finding a partner in life. This is a conversation with Todd Reisz. He's an architect and writer, popularly known for the books Showpiece City and Building Sharjah. He's the former visiting professor at Yale University and guest faculty at Harvard. In this conversation, we talk about his journey falling in love with architecture, why he started writing books on the Middle East, the pros and cons of approaching it as an outsider. He then provides an architecture and urban design 101 masterclass, how architecture shaped the development of Dubai and Sharjah, how it helped shape its cultural identity, the different architectural styles that existed in these cities over the last few decades. We walked through several case studies of different buildings, whether it's the World Trade Center in Dubai or the post office in Sharjah, and how just the facade of the building or the design of the building can tell you so much about the zeitgeist of that entire city. I'm a geek for topics like these, so we spent a lot of time exploring all of these ideas. And then we also explored the importance of optics in architecture, whether design and architecture can be used as a marketing tool or to send a message that goes beyond just the function, and whether form always follows function. And now, mademoiselle, it's no time.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Adolf Loos had once said, architecture arouses sentiments in man. The architect's task, therefore, is to make those sentiments more precise. You've said previously that you were always fond of architecture, but too scared to venture into it. So you first studied English literature in college. Then you went on to work as an urban planner at the Department of Housing in New York City under Mayor Rudy Giuliani. And at that point, you've said that architecture started pulling you in. So I want to start there. What was it about architecture that you were so fond of that pulled you in? What does it stand for? What does it mean? What sentiments did it arouse in you, in the words of Adolf Loos?
Right. Also, when I hear that quote, I also think of how the architecture itself then also arouses a lot of emotion, especially in a city where building and construction is so much part of city life that people really are more aware in a city like Dubai of how much it affects them and how they read it. But back to me, and also being in New York, a place where architecture really was something, I was in New York in city government in the mid to late 90s. So we were really actually living in a 19th century city or early 20th century city. Still the concept of the grid and the skyscrapers was, early 20th century kind of concept with the Woolworth building, right? Mm. So, how did I make that? I sometimes wonder what it was, and I think it actually, I thought it would be more fun to do architecture than planning. So I was lucky to get into urban planning without a planning degree as my first job, and I saw that architects were also able to work at different scales. Even if they were working at the scale of the building, they did have a lot to say, and they had a lot of influence on the places around them. And so I thought the architecture was a place to be where you would have more kind of, I think, interaction with the questions at hand. And urban planning often gets into a lot of approvals and regulations, at least, and that was the the perspective I had from the city government.
It's interesting how you thought working as an architect would get you past the bureaucracy of urban planning and you can deal in just the realm of ideas. I don't know how much of that actually became true. In the book Almanach, Rem Koolhaas says, sand and sea along the Gulf, like an untainted canvas, provide the ultimate tabula rasa on which new identities can be inscribed. Palms, world maps, cultural capitals, financial centers, port cities. You first started looking into Dubai, investigating it when you were working on this book with Rem. That's the first time you visited the city as well during the boom. What was it about the Middle East and about Dubai in particular that charmed you so much that you decided to spend the next 12 years of your life writing a book on it?
Right. Well, first about that quote. I mean, we have to be careful with how we read it, right? Like, I think he, at least how I read it, is that it wasn't suggesting that Dubai was a tabula rasa, but it was being treated as one, which there's a very big distinction between those two. And you could easily read it both ways, but I like to believe that that's what he meant, that it's really, I mean, architects were being invited to treat Dubai and other cities of the Gulf as a tabula rasa. Charmed, I don't know if I guess I was charmed in some ways. Yeah. It was my first time anywhere in the Arab world coming into Dubai. And I suddenly found out that I wasn't just in the Arab world. I was in South Asia. I was in Southeast Asia. I was in North Africa, Eastern Europe by being here. And I started to realize how kind of startling it was that I was learning about other places via Dubai, and that was pretty exciting. And Dubai opened up very socially. Like, I could meet people. People wanted to meet you. They wanted to have dinner with you, or have a coffee, or like it just seemed, it was a place where there are a lot of people coming in, whether they're long-term immigrants or short-term stays. People were here to meet. And that was exciting. After being in New York, it can, be a little cold and cool. Amsterdam, where I live now, is also that way. But also I began to realize that I was starting to see large questions that were starting to bubble up in me about architecture that were playing out here in a way that...
Like, which ones?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to this quote that you brought up from Koolhaas about the treatment of a city as if it were a tabula rasa, it's ingrained in architectural education, this dream of being able to do whatever one wants.
Build from scratch.
Exactly. The technology will come and solve your problems. And I think, that's often associated with a place like Dubai, but yeah, these ideas and these dreams, these fantasies come from Germany, they come from the UK, they come from, New York, the US. And I was also just starting to realize how actually maybe I wasn't supposed to be an architect because of how much it requires to make buildings and almost how little time or a kind of moment of inner inspection, kind of introspection of what we're doing. Like a building requires huge amounts of material extraction, huge amounts of labor that you can't get back. And suddenly, if you put on top of that speed, accelerated development schedules, you suddenly are having no time to think about what you're actually doing. While I don't think that's something that's particular to Dubai, it was being talked about in Dubai, this. And so I was having a kind of moment of doubt about the profession while being here, which was kind of weird. And at the same time, realizing that it wasn't fair to treat Dubai as exceptional in this way.
We'll definitely address all those claims.
Yes.
About it being a blank slate, about the comments that used to be passed from the West, but we'll do that after we cover some of the city plan. But while we're talking about your journey, your co-author for the book Building Sharjah, Sultan Saud Al-Qasmi, had said that his motivation for writing the book was extremely personal because Sharjah is a city he grew up in. And as he watched Sharjah destroy a lot of the buildings to make way for more development, he said he was affected personally, especially like the Mother Cat building. So he wanted it documented in a book. And I can resonate with that feeling because I've grown up in Dubai as well. And there are certain icons of my childhood that have been, in a way, ruthlessly removed or just demolished, whether it's the Ramada Hotel or certain roundabouts, which were pretty ordinary, but these were some things you remember. Hard Rock Cafe, Strand Cinema, Lamsi Plaza, Al Nasir Leisure Land. These are just places from my childhood that are quickly being moved away. You've come into this region as an outsider, like you just mentioned. Do you think that works to your benefit because you can provide an objective, clinical, detached view to actually create fair commentary on the region? Or do you feel it can also backfire sometimes because you might miss a lot of the context and you have to work extra hard to come up to speed?
Yeah. I mean, our topics are also about history, but there is a history here of this fantasy that the outside consultant can come here and work apolitically. I mean, that was very much the idea that these British or Lebanese consultants were coming. They don't know about the kind of inner politics going on, and so they can advise objectively, and that's a fantasy. I think I've gotten myself in a very weird position with Dubai. I mean, I always say that I've never lived here, but I've spent years of my life here. I mean, several years of my life here, if you add it all up. And so I've gotten my place. So, I have dear friends here. I've been to weddings here. I've probably have more friends here than I do in where I live today, right? So I've kind of invested so much that I'm kind of here. I know these places that you've mentioned. I experienced them when they were around. And yet I don't claim
ownership.
I don't claim not ownership, but habitational stance. I don't claim them as part of my history because I was experiencing them as an outsider. Someone who was not putting time and investment in the actual act of living here. I think that's a very big step to take. But then I'm in this kind of weird gray zone. I think that it's not my way of claiming that I know something about Dubai, but it's my way of saying that my perspective is the lenses of my glasses are a little foggy.
I think that even applies to people who have lived here because in a way you never feel like you actually end up owning Dubai as well.
And then there's that, yes.
And there's that as well. So I can resonate, even though we've taken different journeys, we both have landed at the same sentiment. Okay, let's start our architecture, urban design, history masterclass, Architecture 101. For the first half of today's lecture, Professor, you're going to give me a lesson on how Dubai was built, the plan behind Dubai, and then in the second half of the lecture, we'll talk about Sharjah. Okay, let's start with the city that cares. In your book, Showpiece City, you start with a disclaimer that no prologue is an origin. Each is an epilogue for stories before its own. It's where one chooses to begin for now. You have chosen to begin in 1959, just before the city plan for Dubai was made. So let's just get a quick, brief history lesson. What did Dubai look like in 1959 before the plan?
John Harris, who's the British architect who is largely the protagonist of the book, he arrives for a visit in 1959 and delivers the plan in 1960 and the following May. So he gets the assignment in 59. But already then, during that visit, there's something going on in the creek, which is what would you call it? A kind of engineering project, really essentially engineering Dubai Creek into a canal, reinforcement of its shores, the dredging of the floor of the creek, and narrowing it so that the current would actually keep it clean of silt.
Because otherwise ships would get stuck in it because of the
Correct.
sandbars.
So, and then also that would also allow even larger ships to come in, increasing then Dubai's trade capacity. So Harris arrives, and there are in the creek these kind of pontoons doing all this work on diesel engines, kind of pumping out black diesel smoke into the air. Like this transformation has already happened. This is the largest engineering project ever pursued on this part of the coast of the Persian Gulf. So then, that being said, I mean, this was a project basically force-fed by the British government onto the ruling family, the Maktoums, who had to go into serious debt to do this. So it could have actually ruined them if it didn't actually bring in the proceeds from improved trade. That being said, even before then, 1955, when Halkro gets this project, you have to accept that Dubai was already a modern city. It was already a place where people were connected to other places in the world. People who were running the shipping industries in Dubai had a really kind of masterful sense of markets, of navigational routes throughout the Persian Gulf, Indian Ocean, toward East Africa, toward South Asia, even bringing in under the shadows of the British boycotts, they were bringing in goods from Europe as well, from Germany and elsewhere in Europe. So this was a place connected to the world. And that's why I'm always very careful to say there's a difference between a modern city and a modernization campaign or strategy or scheme. And the latter, modernization, being something planned and delivered through a centralized government with the intention to transform. So like a master plan gives you then the ability to know where to lay asphalt. But your question is about what the city was like.
Yeah.
You mentioned this earlier, like I really am against this use of this term sleepy fishing village.
Most common term they used to use.
Yes, it makes it seem like everyone's just kind of, hanging out on on pillows or something and not doing anything. But actually it was to maintain these connections to the other places and to bring that kind of trade and therefore money into the city. It was required constant awareness, right? And all the people, whether they were the highest in the hierarchy to the lowest, were at work making this work. Not even going into the pearling industry, and kind of the collapse of that in the 30s meant all sorts of people who, used to be the labor force of that are also desperately looking for work. And trade and the wharves begin to be the places where they can find work.
Yeah, you often hear this term for Dubai in those decades, sleepy fishing village. A lot of Western journalists, diplomats. The Britishers under Lord Curzon called it a hopeful port. I think it's done really well for a hopeful port in the last 60 years. I wish they could see it. Okay, At this stage, John Harris is hired to create a master plan for the city. And you've already brought this concept of this perception of Dubai being this tabula rasa, this blank slate. And as a result, there was a perception that if you get to work in Dubai or Sharjah, you can start implementing some of the prevailing ideas of what's the ideal way to build a city. Okay, so this is the plan that he designed for the city of Dubai. Professor, can you break down the underlying principles? What is the thought behind this plan? Why does the city plan look the way it does?
An interesting thing about this plan, so you can see that it's very dense toward the Al Ras, the head of Dera. So this part here, and then Shindaga and Burdabay. So what's really interesting is if you look closely in here, what is being drawn here is not what is proposed, but what is existing. So based on aerial photography, someone from the photography studio that was hired to come fly over the city and take these photographs, they traced every single house and structure. So you get a sense of actually what the city was like, actually cities, right? So at this time, we have really Dubai and Dara operating on their own. With still, Al Maktoum, the Al Maktoums being based on this side on the Dubai side, but nevertheless through the British power are being recognized as the ruling entity for Dara. So what's interesting that Harris does is, even though this is not anywhere explicit in records that I've seen, it seems they've learned a lesson. So in Kuwait, which has its plans, its master plan, its first town plan done several years before this one, they decided to raise the entire old city, which, make a long story very short, it was a terrible idea. It brought a lot of kind of urban trauma really from that. But also when that plan happened for Kuwait had oil money. So there was already an idea that even when you raised, you had money to build this new city, this tabula rasa. Dubai did not have that money. So Harris knows that the existing city, for two reasons, cannot be destroyed. One is they don't have the money to rebuild it. And two, if you demolished all of this harbor, you would be like putting an end to the city. It could not, its trade capacity, its wharves, they would all move to somewhere else. They would have moved to Sharjah. They would have moved to, back to Bahrain and Kuwait. To lose that income would have just been devastating. So what he does quite beautifully, I think, is he finds these kind of major roads and alleyways that were already existing in the city, and begins to select them as ways for the city to move outward in a kind of radiating way, and then begins to bring in these kinds of almost connector roads, peripheral roads, and then suddenly you begin to see a very kind of modernist plan structure. I think that's really the most important thing about the plan. He then says, this will bring change to the city. This doesn't mean that the old city will remain as it is. It means that it will be connected to the new districts, and this will begin to change. And so what begins in the old is a kind of, at the same time that this plan is being developed, there's a growing municipality, urban city government, which will then become the entity that negotiates with owners to begin to give this area kind of wider roads. So people will be, trading their property to move elsewhere in the newer parts of the city so that there can be roads. So that's why if you go into Dara today, it's very irregular. And that's because Harris sets this up to be, this is an area of negotiation, and this is an area of clear modernist planning. So what happens here is you start to see lots of rectangles and rectilinear roads, and you see that also on this side, just outside Dubai. So this is where then Harris begins to do some extremely traditional town planning based on the notion of the neighborhood unit. Neighborhood unit, today we have this idea of the 15-minute city. It's not a new idea at all. It's very much attached to post-war British planning, even some American planning. The idea that everything you have is in your neighborhood unit.
Yeah.
So these would be like, being very schematic here, that these would be areas of villas. The villas would have their shops, community centers. They would then have a park in between them. So the idea was you would never really have to leave.
Schools as well.
The school would be shared. Yeah,
Hospitals,
exactly. So this was all supposed to be what were called first and second class housing, which would have been extra large houses and large houses and not less large houses. One-story villas, that's it. So Dubai would have been one-story villas.
There's an old European folktale called the stone soup. in which there's a bunch of travelers who come across a village and they're hungry, they ask for food, the villagers don't give them any food. So they put a stone in the pot of boiling water and they say, oh, we're making a secret stone soup recipe. And the villagers get interested, so they come up to them. They say, oh, we would like to try it. Oh yeah, it tastes amazing, but maybe a few spices might make it better. So the villagers give them some spices. Then they say, oh, a few vegetables might make it even better. The villagers give them some vegetables and they trick the villagers in creating an actual soup. How much of a city's plan is the stone in the soup? Is just the catalyst? Because Rem Koolhaas had once said that every building has two lives, one that is imagined by the maker and one that it lives afterwards, and they're never the same. So is the city's plan just meant to be the starting point, but then the city takes a life of its own? Or do you think it's the key ingredient, it's the underlying foundation, it will always dictate the layout of the city even for years to come?
You're touching also upon how I need to treat John Harris as a character. So I think it's really important to address who he is and what he contributed to the city and how he influenced the city. At the same time, need to acknowledge that the city did not need him to do this. It could have been another architect. I think, one thing that you can say about this plan is the roads were built. So this plan goes to Halcrow, who is a British engineering firm, which becomes the so-called resident engineer of the Maktoum family, and quite literally begins to pour asphalt as the money comes in. So it did really shape it. At the same time, if somebody else had received this commission for the plan, for example, Harris was actually in a kind of strange competition for this commission with the town planners who did the Kuwait project, who are much more well-known as town planners. They were involved in British town planning at this stage, actually had town plans just coming alive in the UK at this time. It was extremely influential in that degree in terms of the roads. However, the villa idea doesn't happen, right? So very quickly, these areas, you do see one-story villas, but you also see more people wanting to be part of a real estate game that predates. The real estate game predates the town plan. One of the reasons for the town plan was to, what's the word? Like to temper the market, real estate market, but also to pump it up as well, just so that it could work in a way that everyone's happy with, who's making money.
We're going to keep coming back to this idea, but while we're talking about the plan, there was a certain aspect of this plan that was not just functional in nature, but also some form of optics. In a way, the plan itself is a marketing tool, some form of soft power, PR, to attract global investment. Do you think if they had taken a completely functional view, that we might have seen a completely different city plan, similar to maybe like those Aramco cities that Robert Vitalis talks about in America's Kingdom? Or do you think Dubai would have looked still the same, even if there was no focus on attracting investment in the city?
Oh, the investment was necessary. It could not have worked. I mean, going back to the stone soup analogy, I'm trying to remember how it worked. But I think that's, you're getting at the spices and the meats there, huh? The need for, so this town plan, one of the few places that you actually see it, so it's difficult to find this in any kind of archive, but you do find it, for example, in brochures and pamphlets that the Dubai municipality was producing, self-writing, self-producing, and delivering somehow to places like Lebanon, or they're in Arabic. So yeah, they're trying to get not just investors, but people to come work here, to maintain the buildings, to open their businesses, to be school teachers. And so, for example, you would see this as a centerfold in the pamphlet, but then you'd have images of, look, we have a zoo, we have a hospital. Here's are the phone numbers to go get your driver's license, and here are 17 banks. So this was very much part of that as advertising campaign, quite literally.
The tagline for your book is how architecture made Dubai. So I want to take a small digression and play a little detective game with you. I have 5 pictures of a bank at the Dubai Creek. And these are pictures from a different decade. And what I would love to know from you is how the architecture and the design of these little buildings, how does that tell us the story of Dubai through the decades? So if you can just break down, Professor, these different buildings and the different design elements, and then how it shapes the story of Dubai.
This is, as far as I can tell, the first place where the National Bank of Dubai was built. It was on the Bur Dubai side, so on the Maktoum side of power, etc., probably around here, like near the Souks, near an important store called Captain Store. It was a very important kind of all goods and whatever you needed kind of store, convenience store as well. I don't know anything about where this came from, how it was built, but it's an interesting bank because it's often said to be, it's not the first bank in the city, but it was an expression of Dubai's having its own bank. So a national bank, and a national bank you usually associate with currency, right? And so it wasn't that, but nevertheless, and it also wasn't just local investors. It required money from other banks in the UK, Lebanon, I think. So they start out here, and then eventually in the 70s, they wanted a new location, and they want to have something larger.
Is the style of the building consistent with the type of buildings being built back then?
I would say so, yes.
Still largely functional because of the heat. There were not a lot of windows, not much of glass, largely mud brick, I guess.
Right, but it does have the air conditioners. So it has the air conditioner units in at the top. My guess is it's probably built for the purpose of this bank. It doesn't seem to be like never looked as closely at it as I am now, but it doesn't seem to be like it was an existing building, say, like the houses of Bastakia would have been, maybe like 50 years old at this time. I don't think this one would have been a difficult one because it's on the shoreline, and you do have attempts at making retaining walls to protect them from water. So that would be a kind of dangerous location. What's also important here is you have the steps, which tells you that this is concrete. That's interesting that we have concrete here. I would like to know how, when that happened. But that also means that this was then an obelisk station for the small transit boats coming from the Dera side. So that means that this was an extremely lively location on the water, which meant National Bank of Dubai was at a really important location in Dera, not far from Bur Dubai, not far from the Souk.
Clearly, you can, in a way, tell a snapshot of what Dubai used to be like at that point and the type of, prevailing ideas in architecture and design. And then we move on to the building.
One more thing may I suggest. So this is also really interesting here. Again, spending more time than ever with this photo. The signage. It's clear that it's a neon signage or electric lighting. This was much more associated with the Dera side. Dera had the kind of commercial money. So in the photograph is probably early 70s. This kind of lighting you would associate more with the Dera side. So this is this kind of assertion that Bur Dubai also has this commercial role in the city.
The more you look, the more you find.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, I'd love to know what that sign says.
Something stores.
Captain? Read Captain on it?
Captain and Sign stores, maybe? That's my guess.
Yeah, so
Captain
it's
and
associated with the Captain store. Yeah. So then they have a British head of the bank. The British head of the bank writes a letter eventually to John Harris. I'm sure they met before, but officially hires him to design for them a National Bank headquarters on the Dera side, which is interesting because traditionally the Dera side is not the side of Maktoum family. So this is a kind of, you could read this as an assertion of Maktoum presence in Dera. But also economically, one of the points of the land was about here. And this is all then reclaimed land. So remember I was telling you about the Halkro.
The dredging.
You've read all this as well, but we talked about it, is what I meant. So that was all, if you want to talk about a tabula rasa, that's about as close as you can get to one. So this is land that's been added to the shoreline. So the shoreline's been pushed out into what would have been water with ground that's been kind of scooped up and made into a new shoreline. All of that new land, based upon kind of the understanding of law, then becomes property of Maktoum family as rulers of Dubai. So this is land that they can use on the Dera side. Harris is brought in to design a building for it with very few. So usually an architect receives a brief, a program of what's supposed to go into this building. There's not a lot said. And so this building, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 or 6 stories high with a mezzanine, is the proposal. Today it looks rather modest in size. I mean, we're not talking about a huge building, right? But we do know that a lot of the upper floors were empty. They were literally just storing money in them. I mean, just like in an office, you would have stacks of cash just casually waiting to be used downstairs. The upper floor was suite apartments of the chairman of the bank. So it was already, here we have a building going up in 1970 that is already, it's bigger than what's needed.
Which is going to be a recurring theme in Dubai. Anyway.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So already we have this building cosplaying itself, like being something that it's not.
It's expressing something already that's more than just the function of it.
Or that it will come. So, you fake it till you make it.
Build it and they will come.
Yes, that as well. Yes. Interestingly enough, this bank, which more or less gets built on the site of what was the first location of National Bank of Dubai, at least as far as I can tell, it was the first location. This gets demolished and this later gets built. So this smaller bank as a kind of branch gets designed and built through management of the Harris firm in the years after this. I would mid to late 70s, this one. I don't have a lot on this building. I know who the architect within the firm was, but I don't have a lot of drawings of it.
Already you can see a change in, I guess, the sentiment of what buildings should look like in Dubai.
But it's also giving us a sense of how a modern building can fit within the existing context. I mean, I fully agree with everything you said, but I think also, it's worth looking at how it works. You at once you see it, and at once you see that it's integrated into how the rest of the existing neighborhood and surroundings work with it. I'm kind of attracted to this building.
It doesn't look out of place, but does look like the next step in the evolution of what the existing architecture is.
That's well said.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. What comes next?
Maybe we talk about this one. So this building, you can see National Bank of Dubai is here. And actually, Harris begins to... He comes up in the late 60s with building regulations for the city. And it was really the idea that, buildings had to maintain a certain height. There had to be an arcade, the ground floor, that you could walk along the ground floor and it would be shaded like an arcade. And that was the idea. And some of the buildings that went up along the creek did follow this idea. There's one bank that looks nearly the same as National Bank of Dubai. What becomes its neighbor is clearly not that. The biggest distinction between these two buildings is actually one that you don't physically see, and that is air conditioning. So National Bank of Dubai has air conditioning, but it's largely through window units. It does have some central air, but most of the offices would have been cooled by window units. And those window units are being concealed through this use of a brise-soleil, which also provides shade. Harris was someone who really did not approve of the use of glass, of the overuse of glass in buildings because of heat, but also because of maintenance. It's terribly dusty, which we all know here in Dubai, like this kind of weird gray, brownish tint that buildings begin to. So this building next to it is clearly central air conditioning, and it's expressing that through its glass. And literally where Harris is pushing glass backward to be shaded, this glass is pushing the glass forward to express its kind of modern image of itself. And this is a bank, BCCI. I don't think they even ever opened in the building. I'm not sure. The lower part was supposed to be extra offices for the ruler of Dubai. The upper part was for this bank, which rather quickly and tragically is exposed as having a lot of corruption and playing with the books, so to speak, and closes. And who knows how this building is being used today. It's still there. It's a really fascinating building to see. Also British architects, whose name I'm forgetting at this point. So this is also a kind of precursor or a kind of, let's say, a warning of what's going to happen to our beloved Harris building, the National Bank of Dubai. In between, we have this one. I can't say much about this, though I felt like it was almost going to be demolished about 5 or 6 years ago, but it seems to be okay now.
Great.
Yeah, it has that kind of reflective glass that we think of especially of Abu Dhabi, right? With the pink and green glasses. I always think of Abu Dhabi when I see this building. So I don't know much about this building, but I agree with the sentiment I saw in your eyes that it's better to keep it. It's just as a kind of as evidence of the way the city expressed itself at a certain time.
It's interesting. You can already start seeing how in the first 3 buildings, they're still building buildings that are keeping the environment in mind, functional in nature. But from this building onwards, there's clearly an outward expression or statement being made that now we don't care about building an optimal building. We have the money to support the maintenance for it, air conditioning, dust, all of it.
We have the fuel as well, right?
Yeah. So clearly you can see a marked difference in the way Dubai is now starting to build its buildings. And that's a reflection of where the economy is or where it's heading.
Right.
Okay.
Correct. Which is a nice segue into this building.
Culmination of this idea.
Yes. So this is the National Bank of Dubai building. This opens in the late 90s, 98. And the architect is a man named Carlos Ott. And yes, so I mean, everything that we were just saying about the expression of glass, pushing it forward, quite similar actually, where you have the idea of the structural building on the ends, offering the span for the glass to push forward as far as possible.
Completely opposite of Harris's philosophy.
Completely opposite, correct.
Which was shading the glass.
Right. I mean, Harris would have great disdain for this building. In a very polite way, he would have great. Then you get into issues of maintenance, use of water, which is already a strained resource, even if you have the money for it. And interesting enough about this building, projecting the glass forward so much that it almost looks like it. The idea was that it would look like a sail, which then reminds us of the Burj Al Arab, which Carlos Ott, the architect of this one, claims
he drew
to have drawn, right?
And never put his name on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the interesting legacy or lineage of maybe use of glass and an expression of modernity in this city.
Just looking at these buildings, some of which exist currently on the creek, you can tell so much about what the city was like. It's like a perfect snapshot, which is what I find fascinating. Already, as we have traced the history of these buildings, we have in a way able to, at least at times, touch upon the evolution of a certain style in Dubai. And in your books, Almanach as well, there's an exploration of, okay, what is Dubai's identity? What is its style? Because even though in cities like New York City or Chicago or London or Amsterdam or Barcelona, there's a mixture of styles and there's a form of layering in the cities, there's still a dominant theme. You can pinpoint Art Deco to be one of the prevailing themes in New York or Chicago, or the hand of Gaudi in Barcelona. But in Dubai in particular, if you go to, let's say, Bar Dubai or Deira, the residential buildings largely follow some form of a functionalist design, a little bit of brutalism maybe. But then if you go 10 minutes down to downtown Dubai, or even further, Dubai Marina, you start seeing this neo-futurism or postmodern styles. So is there a way to actually narrow down a dominant theme, architectural style or design? Is that even something we should be asking? Is that a question that we should ask about Dubai?
A short answer to the last question would be no. That would be my opinion. I think, one thing that I like to express about Harris was, and he was doing buildings like the National Bank of Dubai and Rashid Hospital. He was doing these at a time when this wasn't a question. The issue of style and the geography of style, I think, is an important thing to say.
There was no conversation around we need to establish an identity.
Not that I know
Not
of.
yet.
I mean, he did, you do see elements kind of modestly in these buildings. The domes of Rashid Hospital might remind someone of something, or the arches in the windows of the World Trade Center as well. But these also had very practical purposes. There's a moment that comes, and it's at the very end of the book, the last, I guess, chapter of the book is about, I guess, what I call the last project of John Harris for the city. The firm moves forward, but it kind of closes up an era. And that was for the Diwan on the creek.
Yeah.
So a lot of the houses of Basakia get demolished to create this giant, fantastical version of a like Bargil house. Yeah, ruler's court is sometimes called. So what's interesting there is if you look at so it was a competition. So Harris did not, unlike his other commissions, which largely came via the ruler, he had to compete for that one. And it was apparently an anonymous competition. And people like big architects, Hassan Fatih apparently also competed for this one. And I have seen request for proposals. And it's very explicit in saying you need to have references to Islamic architecture, generally speaking to Islamic architecture, but also making references to Dubai's ancient architecture, but also expressing its technological advancement.
So it's brief that covers everything.
Do with it what you want, right? And therefore, I think, sometimes they say that the ruler's court is the first time that a bargil is used to conceal HVAC equipment. So these giant bargils, which are on that ruler's code, they're concealing equipment for the elevators or lifts and the air conditioning ventilation systems. So
serving the same purpose, but for a different technology.
Yeah.
Still somehow involved in cooling, but not in the way it was imagined.
Exactly. And that really, I think that really signals an era, and not just in Dubai, but in the larger region, especially a lot of the development of Saudi Arabia, where this question of whether something is reflecting a region's values or history, and unfortunately becomes a kind of game of how Western architects are surviving the market by showing that they can express Islamic or Middle Eastern, that's for lack of a better word, Middle Eastern style in terms of ornament. And it becomes a game of ornament. And it still is, unfortunately, a game of ornament, because actually and I'm speaking in very large brushstrokes here. So, I'm sure there are examples where it's more than just ornament, but even the city's regulations, where it is regulated that buildings should reflect heritage or reflect Islamic architecture. This is largely about what you apply to a concrete and steel building to make it look, like in Jeddah here, you can look out and you can see Barjeel on tops of 20-story buildings, like not only is it like impossible to have a Barjeel that's providing cooling it for the 20th floor, but like you can't even pretend at that point, right? So at least at the Ruler's Court, you could kind of imagine that it worked.
Is it Dubai's responsibility to create, one, an identity for the city itself, or two, an identity for the country itself, be emblematic of a national architecture, like in a way New York does for USA, even though it's not the capital, but it's the most popular city, right? So Dubai plays that role for UAE. Or step three, create a template for, let's say, this global city of the future, this futuristic style. Does Dubai have a responsibility in either case, or anything goes?
This is a tricky question. So, I mean, I think, one thing, and it's tricky because, for example, in Dubai, you have a brand office. There is a brand office, that really does kind of think about this idea of identity for a city. Even Dubai in the 1960s had a marketing office in London already kind of projecting itself. I mean, and projecting was also about the British colonial presence here as well, of, making sure it looks like the city is clean and the British are being kind, neighbors. So projection has always, I can't say always, but as early as the 1950s has been part of the game. But we also all know that identity is never a single thing, right? Your idea of the city is very different from mine, is very different from someone thinking of moving here from Kenya or from Indonesia, right? Like so I think there's always this tension between the idea that Dubai is a place that has some sort of cohesive identity and the fact that it obviously does not. At the same time, we all have to read, there's almost a limited maybe menu of what we can read and digest from the city, but nevertheless, there are infinite ways we can see the city. And I guess that's where a lot of times people talk about Dubai in a kind of like, as if it's a thing, or as if Dubai is a person. Dubai does this, Dubai does this. Dubai wants you to see it this way. Who do you mean? And when you say, I don't mean you, of course, but who does one mean when they say that? Like, do you mean the ruling family? Do you mean the capitalistic structures? Do you mean all of the different developers, who are working on, millions of square meters of development? And I think, this also goes back to this use of the term Dubai Inc., which is actually a historical term. I think the earliest I've ever seen it used is like 1970, and London Times, I believe. And it was used then to, talk about Dubai being a very limited government, no red tape, no bureaucracy. But it now has become as if Dubai is a logo. Dubai is and it's like, well, if sometimes people use it to criticize Dubai, but you're also kind of drinking the Kool-Aid at the same time, right?
Right. You took us down this path of philosophy, so I'm going to meet you there. This is my weakness. What makes up the character of a city? How do you decide what makes up the soul or its essence? Is it just the big landmarks like the Burj Khalifa, the Burj Al Arab, the Palm Atlantis, for example, now the Museum of the Future? Are these the icons that in the end dictate what Dubai is, its essence? Or is it often the unspoken things, the ordinary things, whether it's just a random traffic signal next to a Sana supermarket, or like a random roundabout like the Fish roundabout or the Flame roundabout, or just these ordinary residential buildings in part of Dubai? There's an Al Rais building, the Liva building, Ajatan building. There's a pyramid building in Karama. Residential buildings, but just people remember because they were slightly different from the other ones next to them. Do these random streets, signals, buildings make up the soul of a city, or are they disposable? It's just the big icons that make up the character?
I feel like you already know my answer. But it goes back to the point you made. You referenced something that Kohlhaas said, right? Like there are two phases of a building. There's only so much, and that goes. And also, I'm curious who he meant with the creator of a building. Do you mean the designer? Do you mean the client who owns the building? Which also gets into this weird thing where architects also often think that it's their building, but it's not, right? So yeah, there's kind of a point when you put something out in the world and it's no longer you who gets to decide. And that's with anything. It's with a book, right? I controlled this book until the point that I pressed the send button to the publisher. And then it's the world's. Like I can defend it, but people can read it in an infinite number of ways. It's the same. A city is then that like, a trillionfold then, right? Like as much as we might see Dubai as an authored city, as a place that has been designed and in which we are supposed to follow certain rules, and yeah, we all have to follow certain rules, right? There's etiquette, there are laws. Even within that, there are so many ways we begin to shape the city ourselves. I mean, there's just no way you can stop that. The way that people occupy a city, inhabit a city, we shape it as well. And I think that's something that's often overlooked in a way irresponsibly. People can think, and this is observation about how I hear people talking about living here, and even how I'm here. I mean, there's a sense that if we live in a city that is so top-bottom, that is so about like, Dubai Creek Harbor, all the buildings are literally the same color. So you feel like you're a guest at Amar. And so we often allow ourselves to accept that as, okay, we're living in there's nothing we can do, right? Think about traffic. Everyone complains about traffic, right? Oh, the traffic's so terrible. There's this kind of separation of oneself from the traffic. You're part of the problem as well. Did you take a bus? Did you walk? Did you carpool? There's a certain amount of ease in blaming it on somebody else.
I'm not part of the traffic. I am stuck in traffic.
Exactly, yeah.
I completely agree with you that in a way there's a lot of room to play with on what makes up the essence of a city, of a soul of a city. But then at some point, there's an absolute decision to be made on what's disposable and what's not, because how do you decide which building, which street is to be preserved or becomes a national landmark or a heritage site, and which one is disposable? So Dubai is one that has taken, even Sharjah have taken a very strong stance on many areas, neighborhoods, and raised them to the ground to build something new. How do you come up with that decision?
And this is where it gets tricky. So, and sometimes, when you're not alone in how you read these landmarks of your youth, right? This is always a discussion. Nostalgia here is if we start talking about nostalgia, that's it, right? We might as well order dinner in, right? And I always find that a shocking thing, because the cities where I've lived, I don't feel like I have much control either. And so there must be something, and I haven't yet put my finger on what makes it different here. You brought up working for city government. When I worked for the city government in New York, I would represent sometimes the city on certain landmark hearings. So, there's landmark laws that are based from, I guess, the 60s. They're not that old. We're talking about the 60s in New York. And, there are all sorts of rules that, there are hearings. People can come in and go on the record for or against the demolition and rebuilding of something. But, in general, money talks everywhere, right? And it's kind of usually the people who are vocal and a bit ornery who are the people at the microphone, right? But here you don't have that kind of public discussion, right? And at the same time, you do have a lot of discussion. I think it's really lovely that people of your generation, there are these things and you do talk about them. Because I don't recall people talking about these places, where I've lived in such a way. At the same time, it's a difficult question. Yeah.
Let's keep ramping up the difficulty even further.
Go for it.
And you're right. In New York City in particular, you're right, in the 60s when they destroyed the Pennsylvania station,
Correct.
which is one of the biggest heartbreaks I've seen. I think it was under Jackie Kennedy that they started
Correct.
launching the preservation laws, especially for Grand Central Station, which is now almost a ridiculous thought that they wanted to destroy it. And they've done that for my Grand Central equivalent in Dubai. The Ramada Hotel, Namsi Plaza. It's all gone. Okay. We cannot end our lecture on Dubai without talking about its magnum opus, the Burj Khalifa of the 1970s, the World Trade Center building. Now, despite some pushback in those decades against tall skyscrapers after that movie, The Towering Inferno,
Correct.
Sheikh Rashid insisted that this has to be a tower and it has to be much bigger than we need it to be because this is going to be a showpiece for the city. So can you break down the design architecture of this building? Why was it built a certain way? What is the significance of this building?
It went through a number of iterations. And I think one of the important things to understand about Harris as an architect is, like almost every other architect, he's working with many other architects. So we can't think of him as a sort of auteur who, sat down and sketched this out. And in fact, it was even less so with Harris, as I understand it. He wasn't so much one of these architects, sketching his idea and giving it to his assistants to complete. Instead, he was hiring people who were competent designers, who had experience elsewhere, who went to certain schools as well in the UK, known for training people to be responsible designers of buildings, really. So what we're seeing here are ideas based upon a couple of architects working for him. It went through a couple of other iterations. There's an image in the book which I really adore. It basically looks like a World Trade Center New York tower. It looks like the kind of ribs that we all know now that kind of and split at the bottom. That was actually an idea for this building. And I don't know for sure, but one of the issues with that design was that it had exposed glass. So first of all, Harris, as you correctly mentioned, it was not presented first as a tower. It was presented as, I can't remember, but maybe 6-7-story buildings, several buildings.
Low rise.
Yeah, a complex of them, like a hotel, conference center. Hotel, conference center. I don't even know if it had apartments. But again, at the scale that he was really against high rise, he would not, if I believe I'm correct, no, the Rashid Hospital had an elevator, but it was only to get things that you need up to the upper floor. The National Bank of Dubai, it was actually, I think, the highest one for a while. He was really opposed to the idea of installing elevators because he needed to see for himself that there was actually a kind of apparatus in the city for repairing elevators. Was there someone here? He said at one point, you don't put elevators if the closest repairman is in Lebanon.
Right.
Yeah. So by the time this comes up, Rashid makes it explicit when the model is proposed to him that he wants a tower. I haven't seen any pushback from Harris on the idea. I think he went with it. I think he saw this as a moment of building something truly important and lasting for the city. And so he goes on a tour. He goes to visit, and I believe it even is Harris's idea that it is a World Trade Center. Prior to that, it was a conference center. So he's familiar with what's going on in Japan and goes to visit Tokyo's World Trade Center. World Trade Center is, would be a really great book. It's looking at the notion of a World Trade Center. It's a kind of like a club So you have to be a part of it a bit as if you're having what's the word you have? Like restaurants have them, chain restaurants. If you open a
Franchise.
Right. Thank you. So he goes to visit Tokyo, he goes to New York, he picks up a lot of the marketing material and comes back with it. I don't know if I went so far as to say this in the book, but I really think it is Harris's idea of making it a World Trade Center with the copyrights, sign on it. And for a while, at least, it is connected to that club of World Trade Center. So there was the idea that the facade would look almost the same as the World Trade Center in New York, and then this appears, and it's actually quite nice that it happened this way. I believe it's the first building to have a double facade in Dubai, one of the earliest maybe ever. And double facades now are very much part of the sustainability movement, so that you have one facade that protects the other one from shade, from warmth, protects from sunlight and from heat. So the idea is that the inner facade is a kind of pre-manufactured layer, and on top of that, and you can see it even in the design, these are prefab parts, almost fitting together like Legos in a way. And there's a kind of pointed arch in the repeated openings that has a bit of expression of Islamic architecture, but actually the architects claim that that angle of the arch was actually quite calculated in terms of sunlight. The building is turned so that the corners of the building are on the cardinal axes, so north, south, east, west, so that no facade is getting due west, due east, or due south sunlight. Back to your issue of the towering inferno. Harris he was very quippy. He had his stories. He had like 17 stories that he would situate, also like logos, kind of like put them together for a talk. Like he rarely veered from these. And one of them was Dubai had no fire regulations for buildings. So he looked at the British ones, he looked at the US ones, and used both of them. So to give you this idea of, the extra safe building. So one of the things about this building, which is kind of crazy. So the photographs that you take, you've chosen actually help see this. There is a way, even at the highest floor, I don't know if it goes up to the roof, but it goes to the highest floor. You can climb down a set of ladders all the way down. See these holes? These are like, the ladders in a submarine. These kind of very vertical, you descend.
Or you could just drop.
Yeah, it's like as if you're going into a manhole, like these very vertical ladders. So you come down to this level, you cross over, you go down to this level, you cross over. And then it drops you're about like a half story off the ground at the bottom. So you have to jump at the very bottom. And then you can...
in a way, it's like those New York pre-war buildings have the fire escapes, right?
Exactly. The same. Except these are even scarier because they're all vertical. Like they're vertical. I've been out there and I was scared for my life. So, and then in this image, you can see these, it looks like there's a problem with the pixels. These are holes actually, so that you can actually walk. So you come out here where the fire escapes are, and you can walk like this through them. I went out there once and I didn't get even to the first doorway. I walked back. It was too much for me. This is done for cleaning the windows. So you can get to the inner facade and clean the windows. But also, apparently, I've been told this, I haven't seen this in drawings, but the inner facade feels very like it's a prefab thing, like a prefab wall. But apparently you could punch through them if there were a fire, punch through them and to get to this walkway and then walk and go this way down.
So you can get through the entire building just through the outer facade.
Correct.
You can move horizontal and vertically.
Well said. And then, of course, there's also a core stair in the middle, concrete stair protected that you could also, so that's the
Conventional fire exit.
Exactly.
It's such a fascinating building. And you've covered in your book that it was the first form of expression through architecture in the region, clearly built to be an icon, a showpiece, and communicate a lot more than just the function it was going to perform. In the article titled The Tall Office Building Artistically Considered, Louis Sullivan says, form ever follows function, and that is the law. Clearly, with all these different case studies that we've spoken about, Dubai breaks that design rule, but for its own reasons. And then Rem Koolhaas tried to address this in Almanach, where he said, yet, much like Singapore in the 1980s and China in the 1990s, the recent development of the Gulf, particularly Dubai, has been met with derision. Mike Davis's damning Walt Disney meets Albert Speer echoes William Gibson's characterization 15 years ago of Singapore as Disneyland with the death penalty. The recycling of the Disney Fatwa says more about the stagnation of the Western critical imagination than it does about Gulf cities. To be a critic today is to regret the exportation of ideas that you have failed to confront on your own beat, dragons you have been unable to slay. The tragic effect of architecture's inability to recognize the thing through modernization's inevitabilities is a wistful language of perpetual disappointment with what is produced and the endless recycling of nostalgic panaceas as well-meaning but moribund alternatives. It is particularly cruel that the harshest criticism comes from old cultures that still control the apparatus of judgment, while the epicenters of production have shifted to the other ends of the globe. So you hear this often, right? These Western comments, derisive comments. Is Rem right that all of these comments, judgments that are being passed are misinformed, misguided, missing the picture? Are there any merit to the criticisms?
Ooh. This part of Koolhaas's article that you've quoted here, I think is a really strong piece. It also represents kind of what we were learning at the time and kind of putting together. I mean, I'm working for him in the early 2000s, and I think he's the reason why I came to Dubai. You know, there were architects in the firm coming here to work on projects, to meet the clients, but I was just told to go walk around and meet people and take notes and report back. And nobody does that. I mean, it's just expensive. I wasn't an expensive architect. I was, low on the totem pole. But I think there was an interesting time of just trying to understand why people were coming, who was coming, and the purpose of it all. And I think the kind of shocking thing, which he gets at, things that you didn't get right on your own beat, is a reference to, we weren't just coming here and seeing a new city, seeing something that we hadn't seen before. We were seeing everybody else coming with us, right? Who are also on our plane, like the Dutch ambacharaars, or in Dutch word, the reclaimers of land. They were on my flights as well. Everyone's coming for a 5-day get the contract signed tour, right? And that's, I think he's responding to that very much. And it's not like those people on the airplanes were the one delivering the criticism, but they're coming from the same place, right? I mean, Mike Davis's article comes out the same year that we were able to do our first exhibition at the Venice Architecture Biennial. And I thought that was a really important moment, because we went toward that project as wanting to document. Google Earth was brand new at this time. This is 2006. So we were using Google Earth really kind of to understand just how big all of these projects were, like up from Kuwait down through Manama, Doha, into UAE cities, and trying to understand these as a long continuous coast of urbanization. So, I'm maybe giving you a bit more context than you want, but
I want all the context.
Okay. But we were just really, it was a mapping exercise. Nothing is objective. I don't mean to say that. And we were just trying to, Google was terrible at this time. There wasn't really a lot written, critical or otherwise, about Dubai, about Abu Dhabi, about Kuwait. And we were really scrambling for anything we could get our hands on to read and to help us understand these urban histories. And so this exhibition that we did was very elementary. We put Post-it notes on it even, just about each of the projects that were on a Google Earth map. Because we thought, okay, well, next week when we come back, we'll need to remove this Post-it note to update it. It was that kind of feel to it. And in that way, Mike Davis's article is very prescient in terms of understanding very quickly what is happening in a city like Dubai, the kind of real estate game, the kind of arrival of all this kind of global capitalism, let's just put it that way. So he is prescient in that regard. But also it's very limiting in how it sees Dubai. Back to the idea of Dubai as a person, Dubai as an corporation, oversimplifying a city. Who is more ingrained in the global capitalistic system that we all suffer from? New York City or Dubai? No, really, who? London. It's not Dubai, right? And so I think, when you've lived in New York, you kind of live with multiplicity, right? You understand that there's a lot of stuff going down in this town that upsets you and makes your life more difficult, makes people in your life far away from here more difficult, right? We understand cities are places, made up of humans, made by humans at various times. And so we can oversimplify Dubai in that way. Because sometimes I used to say, we can name the people who drew the first town plan here. I met him, he existed, he was real. I can tell you what it was like to meet him, But you can't do that about New York City, right? Maybe Moses, but that's a later iteration. So I think we have to be careful. This is where people live. This is where people, a lot of people who come here have a certain amount of privilege to get here, whether they're coming from South India or South Africa, right? To get here takes some amount of gumption and investment and risk. People are, and then we also have the people who are coming here who are getting out of a situation that is not, bearable. People coming here after, during the Syrian war, right? Again, people who could come here, who had the money to come here, fine. But nevertheless, this is a place where people are just simply trying to live life and be, as happy as anyone else in the world wants to be. So I think that story can quickly get overlooked in a city like Dubai. Yeah.
In Almanac as well, you cover how so many of the expats who moved here were able to fund homes back in South India. You covered a lot of the homes that were built in, I think, Calicut in Kerala itself. And I'm on your side. I often find a lot of comments are thrown in the West that are meant to be these conversation killers about the Middle East, that, it feels so fake or artificial. There's no nature there, or there are too many malls. And I always find such comments so silly. Even the Queen Elizabeth had said that one of man's oldest dreams is to turn the desert green at the inauguration of Port Jebel Ali. Already there's an assumption in that there's an ideal state of greenery to aspire to, and the desert is not the place you have to be. And you hear this comment, there's no nature here. Already there's an assumption that only the countryside with cows and meadows can be green. It could be nature, and the canyons or the wadis over here, the valleys are not nature, which is absurd, because otherwise the Grand Canyon is also not nature. It's already a ridiculous statement, right? And the same about the mall, right? The mall is nothing but the modern town square with the roof and AC. So in a way, nobody asks, why does New York have so many town squares? Dubai has the same, but just put a roof over it and clean washrooms and AC. So I have a lot to say about those Western comments. Okay, let's move to
you can tell me more if you would like. We can.
And we'll have to order dinner.
Okay.
I could write a thesis on it. Let's start the second half of our lecture and talk about this city that is quite close to Dubai, Sharjah. Once again, like we did for Dubai, I want to walk through the plan for this city. So once again, can you break down what is the thought behind this city plan? What are the underlying principles? Why does it look the way it does? How does it sit in contrast to Dubai as well, maybe?
Okay, so this master plan for Sharjah is from 1963. So it comes about 3 years after Harris delivers his. The interesting thing here is that Halkro was not approached for the master plan of Dubai, but they're already quite present there. In fact, have much more to do. Like, town plan wasn't important enough for them.
Okay.
I think by the time Sharjah rolls around, and this is my guessing and estimating, they're thinking, oh, actually, it's good for us to be in charge of the town plan because then it's a matter of control. And I kind of go into my article about Halkro has, through several decades maintains its hold on the shape of Sharjah, starting in 1963. It's a fascinating moment for Sharjah. The plan was commissioned by Sheikh Sakar, who actually doesn't last very long. I can't remember the year of the coup, but he is quickly taken out of power. Maybe a couple years after this plan. What to say about it? Okay, so there are several. This is a much more thorough plan than the Harris one. There are several pages of it, several plans, but actually it's quite similar. It's not as intelligent in the sense that it doesn't pick up on the roads already existing, which, roads being sand paths, it doesn't pick up on them as well as Harris did. And in fact, picks up a few, but it then just kind of basically chops the city into controllable districts, right? You can then, once you break it up, it had less of a sense of neighborhood units and more of this is an area where these kinds of people will live and large highways going through. And those roadways have been built largely. I think what happens maybe even more importantly, so an interesting thing is something maybe we'll talk about is the competition between Sharjah and Dubai, which actually also goes back to British colonial forces in Sharjah and Dubai deciding where they want to be. And it actually turns out that Sharjah was a better place to build a city because this area is actually quite, considering how close it is to the water, it's actually quite high off from water and rock, so that water didn't seep from below, which becomes a problem in Dubai, Dera, Dubai, for a number of years. The thing about Halkro is it seems to be difficult to get into the property, like start purchasing property from existing owners. And so they pushed the plan to develop more toward this area, which is where the lagoons are. This land is it's closer to Dubai, which means it's also closer to water. There's the water table below is much higher. So that's where we see the towers today. You can probably see them, yeah. So you see the towers way out there, that's Sharjah, around the lagoons. Water problems there.
We've spent so much time talking about Dubai in this conversation, and in a way, even the dialogue in the world is often around Dubai. Dubai has become the poster child for the region, not just the country. It's very common to find people who have heard of Dubai, but not UAE as a country. And this might come as a shock to many people, and you've already alluded to this when you spoke about the British wanting to settle in Sharjah. Sharjah was a more popular city all the way till the mid-80s and maybe even the early 90s. It had an established trade industry. It had expos. It had a lot of iconic hotels, bars, lounges. It had one of the world's most famous cricket stadiums. It had the only airport in the region. So what happened? Was there a marked change in strategy, or did Dubai just move faster?
It's a tough question to answer. And I don't know largely, but I mean, you've done a terrific summary of Sharjah in 30 years. It's really remarkable. I mean, it took us 400 pages to do it, so you did it much better. But it also comes to the point, when so Sultan Al-Qasimi, he approached me and asked if I would work on this book for him. And it's co-authored by us, but there are several authors in here, and we actually co-edited it, but we both have writing in it. And we worked with several other people as well on the book. Reem Khorshid and the designer Farah Fayyad was a big player in making the book as it is.
Deepak Unnikrishnan has a story about the glowing men of Sharjah. It's them playing cricket, which hits me directly because I used to be one of those people.
Oh yeah,
playing cricket in the
but
streets.
not with the glowing pucks or anything, huh?
Not in Sharjah. We have to make do with the parking lots around Dubai.
Yeah, it's a lovely piece. But one of the difficult things was like, okay, well, look at this book. I mean, it's just big, kind of monumental, and like who's going to? Why is it important to talk about Sharjah outside of Sharjah, outside of the UAE? What? And that was a difficult thing to decide. I know I'm kind of steering away from your question, but maybe this is bringing us toward it. So one of the things that was really fascinating so Sultan approached me about this book. I was maybe a year or two almost finished with this. And I thought, you know what? I've spent more than a decade on this. This won't be a problem.
Easy work.
Yeah. It's next door. Like, how different can it be? Sultan will be able to help us, get the context we need. And it's pretty surprising just how different Sharjah is than Dubai. And you've already said this, but we often think that Sharjah's modernization happened after Dubai's, but the master plan begins 3 years later, and it's initiated by the ruler, not by the British government. And so the interesting thing that I learned from working on this book with Sultan is the network of expertise. Even though there was some ground of it that is very similar to Dubai, for example, the presence of Halkro, which is what I focused on in the book, the kind of network of expertise of a kind of mostly Arab diaspora based in Europe, even based in Canada and the US, coming to Sharjah to build and design. So whether that's engineers, architects, or the money. Kuwait is also very much involved in Sharjah, seeing it as an investment opportunity. Dubai is already too expensive. Sharjah was where you could get early in on the game in a way. And I think that's how it worked through the 90s. But even the 80s were a pretty tough time. Dubai is suffering from economic decline. So is the rest of the world at that stage. So it's kind of infrastructural dreamland is over for a while. It will come back in the early 2000s. But ultimately, the 80s and 90s are a quiet period. Sharjah did have alcohol. As you said, it had the bars, it had the nightlife. People in Dubai would go to Sharjah for the nightlife. It was a place to go hear bands as well. Music bands were more there. Even though Dubai has these, fancy hotels. It was life of the party was in Sharjah until I'm forgetting the date, mid 80s. I think alcohol there's a decision. We could talk about the different reasons why that was the case. That definitely reshapes what Sharjah is and has significantly shaped how people see Sharjah today. Sharjah is seen as a more conservative city, more serious about culture, which, could be true in certain aspects, but it had its economic kind of heydays of investment and really promoting itself as the kind of neighbor of Dubai.
As much as I have the rose-tinted glasses for Dubai, I have to admit, because of the strong contrast Sharjah provides, I actually love the city. if you move past, and this people laugh at this because a lot of people associate it with the congestion and the traffic getting there.
Yeah.
But the actual old parts of the city I find very, very charming.
Yeah.
And
Tell me one place that you like what part of it?
just the entire, so the strip around there are multiple areas, but obviously the Cornish Road with all those iconic hotels that it has, and the Government Square. And then even though there's mixed opinion on the University City, I like how it's in a way an establishment of a certain identity and going back to a style where you can now start seeing that those motifs repeat in Sharjah, whereas in Dubai, you start seeing, like I said, from Bar Dubai to downtown, there's a complete jump in style. In fact, let's play the same detective game again. Let's try to tell the story of Sharjah, this time with the same building, not even different buildings. So I have pictures of the post office on Government Square, and one picture is the version of the building, what it used to look like. And then there's the other version of the building, which is right after this change in strategy in the mid-80s. So can you break down what the old building was like, what the new building's like, and how does that show us the change in strategy?
Yeah, and I'd like to try to somehow weave in also a response to your description of the creek in Sharjah. So maybe think about this. So this is the post office. It's still there. It's at the exact same place. It is the same building. So one we see, a building that's clearly from, I'm going to guess, the mid-'80s by Darul Handasa, which is now part of a much large conglomerate of design engineering companies, DAR. But based on Jordanian, begun by a Jordanian. Again, this idea of architects from Jordan, Lebanon coming this way and expanding and making their companies much larger. And that was, and being then large enough by the time of the early 2000s boom to be ready to go back to Dubai, and into Saudi Arabia, for example. But the building does have some kind of, we could say, Islamic motifs. The kind of pointed arches give us a sense of Islamic architecture, but nevertheless, a kind of building of its time. And also, I would have loved to see this building because the use of these roof elements are allowing light to come in from the rooftops. I can't remember which direction north is, but this is also glazing on the outer parts of each of those arches. In the early 2000s, so this idea of Islamic architecture, and we show it in the book. There was a kind of guidelines for what one should put into the facade of buildings.
What are the guidelines?
Things like what a window should look like, what a railing should look like, what a door. I mean, again, back to these are using architecture as sign, architecture as symbolism and ornament, not about how a space works. Like a courtyard housing, right? Like it would. You think of when we say courtyard housing as a traditional form of architecture, but that is something social, right? It's where like the architectural form enables or continues a way that people socialize. What I'm talking about is not doing that. It's not shaping. It maybe rehearses a kind of relationship with the past,
right?
But it's ornament. Yeah, it's only a kind of mental or psychological association. So, but this is not a result of that. This is actually then a kind of Islamic architecture 2.0 in the early 2000s. So this happens. I don't know where the decision came from. I can't even tell you the company, the ministry, maybe the public works. They literally kind of shaved the building and put a new facade on it that is, somehow more Islamic in a way. But the building inside, it's probably been renovated some, but the structure of the building is the same. And then, this is a kind of weird erasure, right? Like there's a kind of ghost of the building still there, and this kind of weird kind of inverse of the the kind of upward wing-like rooftop structure, becoming then these kind of pointed arches face downward, right? And I have no idea who did it, but it was we gathered that it was in the early 2000s.
It's so interesting, right? Just the same building, the way it looked in a certain decade is a reflection of what Sharjah was like, and then now the newer buildings are a reflection of the new strategy that they have.
But may I? I'd like to go back to what you were saying about the creek. So Sharjah Creek, that's also something that's happening. So the corniche along there between like Malaysia toward the museum, a lot of these were these, typical 20th century apartment buildings, right? Concrete, steel, glass, like it could be anywhere in the world. They've been demolished, right? And the idea is there is kind of talk about what's going to replace them, kind of traditional architecture representing what was once there. Again, this kind of erasure of a whole kind of decades pursuit of survival, economic survival, that buildings like this one represent. And almost this kind of, we're waiting, these spots, I haven't been back to Sharjah since November, so maybe rebuilding has happened, but they're right now just empty spaces. Where, the future is going to be the past, or the future is going to be this fantastical past, right?
Yeah.
But right now that your memory of the creek is no longer. And so it's going to be the memory of somebody else that will be there, right? Eventually.
Yeah, it's such a great study in how a city evolves and how you start to see imprints of what used to remain and then how much has actually changed or completely revamped. In a way, it's like the ship of Theseus argument, right? If you keep changing one part of a ship, at what point do you get an entirely new ship?
Correct. Yeah.
And the identity is completely different. The culmination of that change in strategy and move towards Islamic architecture is, I think, represented in this, one of my favorite buildings in Sharjah, the central Souk.
You have to love it, right?
How can you not? How can you not?
You're an unhappy person if you don't like this building, right?
Tells you a lot about the person. In fact, this could be like a litmus test for finding a partner in life. Just show them a picture of the Souk and be like, what do you think of the building? I was actually, side story, but maybe 10 years ago, I was hired to create a 3D mapping project for the central Souk. And I spent a lot of time visiting the site and like studying it, escaping, and I completely fell in love with it. So how does this building represent the Islamic architecture? What are the different symbols or motifs that represent the style?
One thing to note, just to be clear, so this happens after this building has been built. So this is early 2000s. I think this is maybe mid to late 80s that this is finished. So one thing that we need to take note of is, so we were talking about how the kind of catalog of Islamic motifs and details.
The guidelines.
Right. These were also instruments for Western architects to stay in the game.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and this is a British architect, Michael Lyle. And no matter how fantastical this is, I think in building Sharjah, we showed a model of it. I mean, it was supposed to be way more wind towers on the rooftops. There's some curious things going on. The blue reminds me of a lot of like
Turkish, maybe, or Iranian.
Iranian, yeah, kind of. Often hear the Shia mosques are blue, right? I found that to be a curious detail that got through review about this building. But yeah, again, we have the barajil showing up in a completely like useless way, right? I mean,
like ornaments.
Yes, they're just kind of toppings on the cake. And it was actually not air conditioned to begin with. Was that maybe actually? It might have been made.
It was first, I think, an open air market that was then
correct
closed up. Right?
Actually, the wind towers may have actually been designed to be used. I can't remember this. Sorry, it's been a while. It may have had some kind of passive cooling system that used those barajil, but sorry, we're recording this, and I could be saying something unfactual. But nevertheless, we see that, there's the the glazing that was added later to air condition it, because people weren't coming to the souk. And the souk was...
Why was it not?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's still pretty empty when you go, no? I mean, when I go there, it's a little bit sad. I mean, at the same time, people do... Tourists go. Tourists know it's on the tour map, right? But it's also on the nostalgia map. I guess for people growing up like you, no?
Well, not the Sharjah Souk, but the Dera Souk more than the Sharjah, because I grew up in Dubai.
Yeah, right.
And I swear by Dubai, there was a rivalry.
Okay. Never to Sharjah.
Never to Sharjah as a kid. But then I started developing a love for it much later in life. There we go, found the pages.
But there are people who, swore by the juice bar there, the shawarma seller at the Blue Souk. Of course, the carpets. It's well known for its carpets. Yeah. And also very much ingrained in the Halkro plan for Sharjah. It's kind of on this...
I finally found the picture that you were talking about.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, even more blue and more gold, right?
Yeah.
I mean...
Imagine that, though. I actually quite like it.
It almost starts to look like Mesopotamian or something. I mean, look at all the detail on the arches. This would have been extremely expensive.
Well, money is the least of my concerns.
Or the architects, yeah. Yeah, that was a great find, this one. But even the ornate street lamps, you can see them coming up as well. Not the same, of course. But it is a difficult place to get to. So back to that chart, the Halkro plan, like it's really a place you drive to. If you try to walk there, you do risk your life.
I think that's a reflection of a lot of the Gulf cities in general. Okay, so you alluded to...
That's not true. You can easily... Dera is one of the most walkable places in the world.
Just that pocket of Dera, but try walking from Bar Dubai to...
That is true.
Sheikh Zayed Road, maybe.
I will agree.
You alluded to this very important relationship where you have these two important cities, Dubai and Sharjah, sitting right next to each other. And in your books, both the books, you cover how often the plans in either city influence the plans in the other cities. When Sharjah announced plans for building a hospital, Dubai devised a plan for expanding the Maktoum Hospital. When Sharjah announced the plan for a two-berth harbour, Dubai accelerated plans for building Port Rashid. Sharjah had the only airport in the region, so Dubai bumped up the priority for building an airport. What is this relationship? Is this a unique, friendly rivalry, healthy competition between two cities that often dictated how the city developed? Is Dubai only Dubai because it has Sharjah for a neighbor? Do you think, regardless of who the neighbor would have been, both these cities would have developed anyway the way they have?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for reading. You're picking up on a few places where I've written about this, so it's a true pleasure to hear you reading and thinking about it further. So I appreciate that.
I don't know about thinking, but definitely reading.
No, don't underplay yourself. But yeah, so that was one of the really fascinating things working on both books in that regard. In fact, I thought I understood the story, but then between Dubai and Sharjah, but when I flipped to the Sharjah side, then I started to look at the same sources, but from the perspective of writing about Sharjah, which was a fun technique to have. Yeah, I think there's, this narrative, which let's just call out this guy. There was a political agent named James Craig. And I kind of use him as the person who really started this myth, this narrative that Sheikh Rashid, the ruler of Dubai, took advantage of the moment and saved his creek, while Sharjah, those lazy, let it silt up, and that's history. There you go. And now the world knows Dubai and doesn't know Sharjah. And that is just completely not true. And there's no way that James Craig was ignorant. Like this is creation of myth. And even though James Craig, he will go on to say, later in life, I met him in probably around 2010, 12, He would go on to say that he went back to Dubai, in the early 2000s and stayed in a hotel that had too much air conditioning. If he had known that Dubai was going to become this, he would never have done what he did, right? But he is actually, like in written words, part of myth building. So this is I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, because what you're referring to in terms of truly some cutthroat competition. Let's be clear about that. It's not friendly rivalry. There was some serious cutthroat, live or die decisions being made on either side of that. What's the word? Undetermined border between the two. So, and the British get involved as well back to that project we were talking about, 1955, Halcrow shoveling muck out of the creek and narrowing its course. There was a decision made to do that work in Dubai or to do that work in Sharjah. Already, though, the British government had decided they wanted to move to Dubai. They found it a livelier port and more to...
A hopeful port.
A hopeful port, that's right. Correct. I think that also had to do probably with the relationship they felt with Maktoum family. Not that the Maktoums they weren't bending the knee, but Qasemi had a much centuries-long bitterness toward the British government. So consultants, right? Halcrow at this point is a consultant. What do consultants do? They're supposed to act like they're bringing great new innovative ideas to the client, right? At the same time, they have to tell the client, you are so right. You are doing what you need to do, right? Like they kind of like pump them up.
You're exposing all the people at Deloitte, PwC.
And architects and engineers, right? Like you're playing this game of putting something fresh at the table, but also underscoring you're doing just great, right? You start the conversation with a compliment. Yeah. So the British, it just seems unconvincing otherwise that Halcrow didn't know that Dubai had already been chosen as the port from where British government was going to support British oil companies in the region. That means Sharjah is out, right? So, and we know that just the slightest change of geology, of demographics, of financial or trade networks can make one port big and busy and the other one disappear from the map. So, and all of these people know the leaders and merchants of Sharjah, of Dubai, etc. So what's really fascinating, there is no record that I have seen where the Maktoums were actually pushing for this work on the creek. There is a record of Sheikh Sakhr of Sharjah really working hard, trying just to get a pier. Just like, let's just build a pier, or something a little bit larger. When the British he realizes that they're going to choose Dubai as the place to do the improvements, he starts looking elsewhere. He talks to diplomats from and engineers from Germany and I think maybe Denmark. And the British are going around behind his back and stepping those lines, keeping people out. Even though here's this man literally trying to save his city, save his port. And he continues to do this. And you also see it in Sheikh Sakhr hiring Halcrow for a master plan to make sure that there is a port feeding into the streets of the city. That's not the case in Dubai. The British government is actually encouraging very strongly that Rashid selects a town planner. And in the end, he does speak the name of the one he wants, but it is a hand-holding situation. And understandably, if you don't know what town planning is, like he's been to London, he's seen what London is, but to understand this idea of selecting one planner over another, who would really be qualified to do that anyways, right? So then from this then becomes this, several years later, James Craig is in the mid-60s, so 10 years after this decision is made, is already writing this mythology. I hope this was
it's good
clear.
context.
Yeah, the chronology was a little bit messed up. But as you're saying, there are all these other things that are happening. The British are trying to encourage and the Maktoums to find funding to expand the hospital. Again, it's in the British interest that there's a hospital and people are able to have access to hygienic healthcare. And at the same time, there's rumors going around that someone is looking to put invest in a hospital for Sharjah. Because there's been an article in a Kuwait-based magazine that Sharjah, it's hardship, and Sharjah needs a hospital. So, what does that do? That accelerates getting that hospital here on the ground, which then has a decelerating effect on having a hospital in Sharjah. Choosing where an airport is. So the airport we can see here is Dubai. Before that was there, the only place you could land in Dubai was the creek. There would be these planes that would land on water. Otherwise, you landed at the air station in Sharjah, which is very close to the Dubai border. There were two options for an airport site. Halcro gave two options to the ruler. You could have one there, or you could have one way out Jebel Ali. Great place for an airport in terms of the ground plane being right. Where did they choose? The one near the Sharjah border, which would then compete with Sharjah for air traffic. So all of this is even the extension of Sheikh Zayed Road in the direction of Abu Dhabi. What is that doing? That is moving the kind of axis of growth away from the creek, away from Sharjah toward all this land that Dubai has available for development. So, but there are, these moments in Sharjah which is responding, at times competing, also wanting to have a large port. All right. And then, so Halcro is in this situation where they're pushing both Dubai and Sharjah to do a large deep sea port. And using Sharjah to get Dubai to double down, because Dubai definitely had more money to build it, leaving Sharjah then in defeat in that sense. Sharjah is doing two ways. One, it's trying to compete in a way with Dubai in terms of these large infrastructure projects. The other one is trying to pick up the slack where Dubai has let go of things, residential apartments, industrial areas, which we all know the industrial areas of Sharjah that come up to the border. It's not just about putting your kind of least appealing elements of the city toward the border, but it's also you're picking up business. Cheaper real estate's cheaper, restrictions were cheaper. You had access to more people in power to do what you wanted to do, so that you, in principle, move faster on your ideas. Whereas Dubai was already developing that bureaucracy that it had tried to avoid.
It's so fascinating, right? Often when you talk about Dubai and the growth of it, it's often spoken in isolation. But in a way, Sharjah has played such an instrumental role. One, in providing a sense of contrast as a neighboring city. In fact, you can't talk about the story of Dubai without acknowledging how much Sharjah has driven it. And the second aspect is how much of Sharjah is actually in this linked partnership or coupled with Dubai, where there's even now a strong workforce that works in Dubai but lives in Sharjah and commutes every day. And so the presence of such a strong city like Sharjah has also helped people also build a lifestyle where they can work in a certain place and also afford a lifestyle in another city.
Correct. Yeah. But oftentimes I think that story, to build upon what you said and what I perhaps missed to say, is Sharjah is often seen in this role of picking up that slack, that it's surviving on the grace of Dubai, right, which I don't think is fair.
Right. Not true at all. Yeah. Interestingly, you're starting to see that now, even in a city like New York, where New Jersey has often played that role,
right,
where many people live in New Jersey, cheaper taxes, cheaper rent, and then commute into the city. But over the last few years, I think Jersey City in particular, Newport, those areas have started to establish their own identity and create a sense of contrast where you would want to prefer it for what it is and not for its proximity to Manhattan or New York City.
Nice comparison.
This has been a fantastic masterclass. I would love to take another course with you next semester, but we are running out of time right now. But already, I think in breaking down the story of Dubai and Sharjah, you've highlighted so many things that are not often spoken about. In general, there's always been a lack of literature or documentation about the growth of these cities and acknowledgement of the amount of thought and intent that's put into it. I remember the first time I read your book, Showpiece City, was the first time I actually felt that, I feel like there's finally a lot of intelligent thought or conversation or dialogue happening about the city that I grew up in where nothing used to happen. So these books have already been instrumental. This masterclass that you've given me has been even more so. Let's start wrapping up. Before we go there, I would love to know what masterpiece you've built with a Lego and what do you think I've built?
You've done a better job, but I think you have more experience. I was actually thinking right just before you said that. I didn't grow up with Legos, but my nephews did. And what I really loved learning from my nephews and how they build with Legos is they only, for a time, would only build small things like this, like lots of small things, which maybe actually like Legos more, like not seeing them as building something, that takes up a table, but kind of little devices. I don't know. I guess maybe it's my thinking, but I always think of Legos as architectural models, but they can also be other things. They can be full-scale models, or they can not be models. They can be the thing itself. Yours is quite architectural.
What does it look like?
It's very postmodern.
Exactly what I was going for. What about you?
I think I'm more constructivist.
Wow, strong statement. With the Lego, postmodern constructivist. Let's go into the last 4 closing questions.
They can coexist, I think.
On this table, for sure, they can. I don't know whether they can next to each other in real life. There's only one way to find out.
Were you going for the Dubai frame with this one?
Definitely. I'm recreating my fantastical skyline.
That should have just been by itself.
In Dubai, the largest.
There you go.
There we go.
Or Museum of the Future.
Museum of the Future.
Right?
Yeah, it'll have to be flattened slightly. Last 4 closing questions. What do you think is the greatest man-made structure of all time? It's only going to get harder from here.
Greatest man-made structure. The Netherlands.
The entire place?
Pretty amazing. I mean, it's a reclaimed land, large parts of, especially the western side.
Who do you think was the greatest architect of all time, and why?
I should have been prepared for you to ask this one. I don't really like architects, so maybe someone like.
Let's say I'm a student of architecture, and there's this one person whose work really changed the way.
Otto van Eyck, then.
Why?
Otto van Eyck is a Dutch architect. Actually, the most beautiful thing about him as a practicing architect was after the war, there were a lot of vacant lots in Amsterdam. There wasn't a lot of money. There wasn't a lot of money to rebuild. And he began a program working with some fascinating architects and artists, including a man named Constant, to build playgrounds. And they used steel tubing in a way really efficient to create very simple playground equipment, including, so some of it still exists today, but they would put these things in vacant lots throughout the inner city. One thing that still exists are most of the bike racks are still from this era of Otto van Eyck's work. And there's a beautiful book. There was a beautiful exhibition at the Stedelijk in Amsterdam about the work, and a book afterwards. But I think speaks to the point of an architect working at a moment and at a place and with what you got.
What are some books, movies, role models that have strongly inspired you? Looking for recommendations.
Recently, I'd go, last November, I read a book that completely shocked me and I think needs more reading. More people need to read it. It's written by a man named Wassim Saeed, who lives in Gaza. He was a physics student before the attack started. And somehow, the backstory is it's described in the book, but he just starts writing his daily life. And it wasn't his idea to be a writer, but he's somehow written this kind of memoir at an impossible moment called Witness of Hellfire of the Hellfire of a Genocide. It is just a shockingly. He wrote it in Arabic. It's been translated and beautifully made, and he was writing this, in cramped, retrofitted school classrooms before they were moving into tents. You even see a photograph. He's working on the floor on the ground, writing. And you think of people, like great authors who had to write in candlelight, and this then makes that look like easy as pie. And somehow what I think is so brilliant about it is here we are in one of these most horrific moments of our modern history, and yet someone is writing in a way that is caring and humane. It can make you emotional to think about it. It's somehow someone who is also caring for you as a reader so that you can take it, which is just this unexpected gesture of generosity. So it breaks through somehow any expectation of genre, which is then just also something that's really hard to digest because it's coming from a place where it doesn't need to be happening. You know what I mean? So it's Witness of the Hellscape of Genocide by Wassim Saeed.
Movie recommendation?
Movie. I saw anything by Kurosawa.
Oh, okay.
We had a Kurosawa festival in Amsterdam this past summer. I've never been an action film, but a lot of these action filmmakers rely on him as a source and inspiration, and then you realize just how beautiful the backstory of the hero can be. Yeah. But also another Gaza one was The Voice of Hind Rajab, which is in the same way as I described Wassim Saeed's book, like another film that breaks through genre at a time that we can't place as well. Incredible acting, innovative filmmaking, and storytelling that also takes care. Actually, the exact same thing that I would say about Wassim Saeed's book, I would say about the Hindu Voice of Rajab.
Last two questions.
Okay.
What would you like your legacy to be? How do you want to be remembered?
Nice.
That's it?
Yeah.
How do you want your work to be remembered, your books?
Yeah, writing a book is a pretty cool thing. It was a really hard thing to do. I didn't go out in life wanting to write a book. But toward the end, so it took me 12 years, or 13 years to write it. And I think at the end, there was kind of this euphoric moment of, you know what? If I die now, that's okay. It was a really bizarre, it's euphoric. It's not real, right? It's a kind of, you're in a zone. But it feels good to prepare something that you feel, if it doesn't last, then it could have lasted. You know what I mean? It feels good to make something. I don't think I would have felt the same making a building.
In fact, one of the first episodes I did on the show was based on your book with Sahil
Latif, yeah.
Who's a professor at architecture at Amity University, now working at the Sharjah Triennial. And it was completely inspired by your book because I think both of us agreed that there was barely any literature about these cities that we grew up in, that we love so much. And in a way, your book was presenting these cities in the same light as how we talk about New York City or London. And it was finally good to be seen and heard. So I think the work will definitely live on. And I think it's only increasing in popularity now with the Building Sharjah book. I think you know what to do next, Ajman, and then work downwards.
No, I don't think so. I am working on. Can I do a pitch?
Why not?
I'm teasing. I am working on a new book about Dubai, which I think might be the last time I write about Dubai. But it's looking at. So this book ends with the early 80s. Actually, 79 the World Trade Center, but there's a kind of epilogue about the ruler's court. I'm now looking at the period of the 80s to the mid 90s, which is actually one of the reasons why my book ended where it did. Was you lose sources. Like if you don't have access to material, you can't write a book like this one. And kind of started to find those sources for a period from the mid 80s to the mid 90s. So looking at kind of the era of building Sharjah, but then back to Dubai, which is a cool thing because then I will look again at Dubai having looked at Sharjah.
Our conversation also, well, it pretty much ended with the World Trade Center until the mid 80s. So when you write that book, let's do
we'll meet here
a
again.
Second course. And this time we'll talk about the 80s and 90s. We didn't touch upon the Burj Al Arab, Emirates Towers, the development of the Sheikh Zayed Road. So all of that is fascinating. You have the opportunity to build your cinematic universe with all the 7 Emirates. So I say, why stop at Dubai? Quain, Ajman, Russell Khaimah, they're waiting for you to start.
I think we'll stick with Dubai. But and actually this is being done with Jameel Art Center, which is where we are today.
This is where we're shooting the
so
beautiful
thank you to Art
location.
Jameel for allowing us to be here. But yeah, we're hoping to make it into an exhibition.
One of the best views of the creek that you'll find in the city.
So true.
Final question for you.
Final question.
What is the meaning of life, Todd Reisz?
You did warn me about this one, but I didn't prepare. What is the meaning of life? First of all, I don't know, but if I had to say, back to love and to be loved.
Love is always the answer, in the words of John Lennon from the Beatles.
Yeah.
Todd, if people wish to connect with you, find out more about you, read your books, what is the best way to find you, connect with you, engage with your work?
The book sells the best in Dubai, which I'm very proud of. So you can find it in Kinokuniya. You can find it here at Jameel Arts Center. Mm-hmm. Also online and things. Where can you find me? I have a website, which is myname.com. And I do a newsletter every now and then. I have one coming out probably the end of this month that kind of tries to place some of the themes of history from these books into kind of more current contexts.
Todd, this has been easily 4 years in the making. We took a long time
it's true.
to get here, but this has been worth every minute for me. This has been a privilege. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Shailesh. And also really wonderful that you just take the time with the books and things. It's not assumed that happens. So, and I know that took a lot of your time. So it's really... anytime it's touching that someone has read one's book, but then also that you took the time and to have this conversation with you. So thank you.
This is no time. If you liked what you just watched or listened to, then please consider supporting this channel by subscribing on YouTube, follow on Spotify, or rate 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. This project is a labor of love, but cannot survive on love alone. I've given myself 1 more year to get it up and running, and if it doesn't make it, then I shut shop. This has been an experiment in seeing whether there's an appetite for conversations like these, 1 or 2 hour discussions about philosophy, about physics, about architecture, about the inner workings of every industry. I know the algorithm doesn't push conversations like these. It prefers maybe 60-second, 45-second, gossipy, clickbaity video, sexy content that will go viral overnight. But I believe in my heart of hearts, that's not what the people want. This is just the algorithm trying to shape the way you consume your content. So if you want to see this project continue, please consider becoming a YouTube member or a Patreon member. You can commit as low as $1 a month. YouTube members get early access to all these videos. You can buy super thanks on individual videos as well. If not through monetary channels, then do consider sharing these episodes, because the algorithm is not my best friend. The only way videos like these can reach everyone else or like-minded people is through your shares, your likes and your comments. All forms of engagement, they really go a long way. For other forms of love and support, you can follow this channel on Instagram or Twitter, or follow me personally.